you're going to go home.
Just busy. Oh, I'm going to go home and collapse, yeah. But not yet, because we've still got this. We have the next class, which, as I was saying, is why we want to make sure we start on time, because I have to get to the next one. But I heard someone tapping on the door. We'll let them in, and then we'll get rolling.
Well, Nathan, he's asked a lot of questions. We don't ask him any questions. He's good, though. He likes to ask a lot of questions.
So tonight we're going to be talking about life cycles, the different events in a person's life, and how Judaism celebrates them. Judaism is a very enthusiastic celebrator of life. So there are a number of different occasions, and we have a different way to celebrate them, but all of them are great. Just looking at the door, are they coming back? Somebody? I heard it tapping on our windows, so someone should be coming. Hello. All right, so life cycles for tonight. A reminder that because we have the Machloket Matters, the argumentation class for the next 5 weeks, we're going to have to try and start as close to 6 as possible, because I have to run from this to the chapel. Okay, good. So, birth. That's where every life starts, is when you're born. Judaism is very clear on that life begins at birth, and we celebrate it. So, as we know from the book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis, the very, very first commandment God gave to humans was be fruitful and multiply, which means have children, have a family. All children are a blessing, and we welcome both boys and girls into the people of Israel to be part of the nation. This welcome includes some common elements, such as giving them a name and a blessing, but there are also some differences, the most important being Brit Milah, circumcision, right? We don't circumcise girls. Very, very important. Well, I mean, you chuckle, but there are some cultures in the world where they do something like circumcision, which isn't. It's very, very different and very, very damaging. And that is not allowed in Judaism at all. So let's talk a little bit about names, right? Leah conceived and bore a son and named him Reuven. Look, a son, right? I've got a son. This is one of the many names that are given in that chapter of the Torah. And we know that in Judaism, names have special significance, right? We don't pick names just because they sound nice. Well, at least originally we didn't, right? They can reflect our gratitude. The way that she named her son was how she was feeling. They can reflect our present. Ephraim and Manasseh are both named by Joseph because
Joseph's son, no?
Joseph's sons, because they reflect what it felt like when he was in Egypt, and basically trying to distance himself from his family. Moses too names his son Gershom. I was a stranger there, because he's living in a strange place. So sometimes people will name their children about their current situation. Sometimes they'll reflect our dreams. Many of the prophets, like Hosea most famously, will name their children based off a vision for the future, what they want to see in the future, what they hope for, their dream. Sometimes also not so hopeful, but that's only for the prophets. And all of them, however, reflect our heritage. In Judaism, Hebrew names have 3 components. They have your name, Ploni, or Plonit if you're a girl. That's like anonymous. It's not a real name, right? Bar or bat. Bar means son. Bat means daughter. Ploni veplonit, right? So it would be Yehoshua, Joshua, son of Abraham, my father's name, Verut, my mother's name. Okay. So in Judaism, classically, we don't have last names. You have your name plus your parents' names. So every name is really a little family tree.
Yeah.
It has the link from you and to them. And then if you know your parents' name, then that means you know your grandparents' name. And if you know your grandparents' name, you know your great-great-grandparents. It goes back and back and back through the link.
Joseph ben Abraham.
Exactly.
Ben David.
Exactly. So you'll often find many famous people will have the name Ben so-and-so, Ben so-and-so, and that's because it means son of somebody. For example, one of the people I mentioned a lot, Rambam, that's actually not his real name. Right? His real name is Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. His father's name was Maimon. His name was Moshe. So if it's Rambam, right? It makes an acronym out of that. All right, so the names are very, very important. And if you convert, you need a Hebrew name too, right? You need to have a name that works in Hebrew for when you're...
She changed the name.
Well, it's not change, it's adding.
Exactly.
Right, it's adding the name.
Exactly.
So when you're called to the Torah, or if you get married, or if you are filling out anything that's important that has your Jewish name, it will be your Hebrew name. And when you convert, you can choose what name you want. Many people will choose a name from the Tanakh, from the Bible. For example, a lot of people will choose Ruth if they're a woman, because Ruth, of course, is sort of the most famous and wonderful example of somebody who we saw convert to Judaism. Sometimes they'll pick someone from history. Maybe you really loved David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, and so you'll pick the name David, not because of King David, but because of Prime Minister David. That's perfectly fine. Sometimes there will be a personal connection. For example, I had a man who chose the name Chaim, which literally means life, but he chose it because his father-in-law, his name was Chaim, and he had passed away many years before, and that man was always somebody that he looked up to, so he wanted to honor him by using that name. Sometimes it'll be similarity to a current name. So somebody might be called Dolores, and so they'll pick Deborah, because it feels a little similar to their English name. Or any other reason. It could just be you think it's pretty, it makes you feel good. Or it could be what you hope for. It could be...
She liked Sephora.
Sephora?
Yeah.
Sephora?
She liked this name.
Or do you mean like Moses' wife?
Yeah.
Zipporah.
Oh, Sephora.
Zipporah, yes.
I like that name.
It is a beautiful name.
Yes, it is.
Yes. So there are any number of names, and when you get close to the needing a name, you talk to me, and I've even got a name book you can look at that has a whole bunch of different examples. It'll tell you what English names or foreign names will mean, and then you can find Hebrew words that will match if you're interested. So it gives you lots of different options. But you don't get to choose your parents. Everybody who converts gets the same parents, Abraham and Sarah. And Abraham and Sarah, we mean big A and big S, meaning the original Abraham, the original Sarah, right? So everybody who converts has the best parents you could imagine. Was that someone else?
No.
It might have just been the wind.
That was pretty
Yeah, I don't see anyone else out there, so I think we're okay. And they can knock harder if it's really them. Okay, so that is the naming. Brit Milah, as I mentioned, is circumcision. Circumcision, technically, for those who want to look this up, I'm not going to make any pictures, is the removal of the foreskin. That's the extra piece of skin that men are born with at the very tip of their part, and which can be removed quite safely and quite easily. Why do we do this? Well, Genesis 17, and throughout the generations, every male among you shall be circumcised at the age of 8 days. Right, so we count 8 days from the day the baby is born. So if they're born on a Monday, you go, Monday is day 1. And then you count until you get to 8, and then that is the day of the Brit Milah. If the child is not healthy, then you don't do Brit Milah right away. If the baby is sick, you wait until the baby is strong enough to be safe to do this. That actually happened with my son. He had jaundice, which is where the skin is too yellow. And so it took a while, making sure this isn't a problem, and then he was able to have his Brit Milah a week later. So he was just a week late. But for example, I was in the hospital for like a month before I was able to come home when I was first born. So my Brit Milah was delayed by a month because you wait until the child is strong enough to be able to do it. And Brit Milah is one of the very special things. If it is going to fall on a Shabbat or a holiday, we still do it. So if the Brit Milah day is Yom Kippur, you would do Brit Milah on Yom Kippur. Now, sometimes it's hard to find a moil in your town who can be there for Yom Kippur, but if you were to live in a small town where everybody lived in walking distance, then yes, you would do Brit Milah on any day of the year, because it is one of the most important commandments. It is one that has been part of our people all the way back since Abraham, and it's one that has often been targeted by anti-Semites and by laws of unjust governments, and it's something that we have fought very hard to keep going. So it is not surprising to know that Brit Milah supersedes everything else. Any questions? If you want to know more about how to do Brit Milah, I can show you some books. Okay, now, that shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. The Brit Milah, the circumcision, is a sign, it's a reminder. I know that in the modern world, for many stupid reasons, most people don't like to talk about below the waist. But Judaism has no problem with that, right? It's not something we talk about casually, but that part serves as a symbol of the relationship between us and God. And so the symbol of the circumcision is a very important reminder of our bond with God. It is like I said, it's a sign of the Brit. Brit literally means covenant. A covenant is like an agreement that's even stronger than a contract, right? It is being connected permanently with something else. And like I said, we have done this for 3,000 years, no matter what.
Mara's here.
Mara's here. Okay.
One question. Only Jewish to 35, or doesn't matter? I mean, in the hospitals.
So in the hospital, anyone can be circumcised.
Okay.
And in fact, for a while in the United States, in the 70s and 80s, circumcision was very popular,
Yes.
even for non-Jewish men. So I think, if I remember correctly, when I was young, like 70, 80% of the boys were all circumcised. And of course, they weren't all Jewish.
What happened when the boy, you have circumcision on the children,
Mm-hmm.
the hospital, not you circumcision, in the hospital, regular. What happens if conversion for the youth?
Okay. So if you have a circumcision in the hospital, but then you have, just a second. Okay, we'll get to that when we talk about conversion. So 2 more slides.
Okay.
Oh, go back. There we go. All right. So the ceremony of Brit Milah can be done in the house or any other place. Right? Most commonly, it is done in someone's home. Sometimes people want to do it in the synagogue too, and that's fine. We've had many circumcisions in the social hall. Because it's also nice to have a party. It's important to have that meal with it. So some people like to do it there. It is best done by a good moil. A moil is a professional circumciser. That's his or her job. Now, of course, doctors know how to do this, but doctors do it occasionally. A moil does it every week. You want the guy who does it most. All right, you want the professional to take care of this. And a good moil knows how to do it so the baby feels almost no distress and is comfortable right up until the moment, and then boom, it's over. And you only have to worry about mom and dad being upset. But the baby is taken care of very, very nicely. Whereas doctors, they have a different way of handling the baby. And I have found, because I've helped doctors do it and I've helped Mohalim do it, and I have found that when the doctors do it, the baby cries a lot more. The baby's a lot less comfortable. You don't technically need a rabbi there, right? Because I'm not blessing the baby, right? It's not like the rabbi makes the baby holy. The baby is already Jewish. The baby is already part of the covenant. The circumcision is just a symbol of that. But it's nice to have the rabbi there. I like going. Because it is important to make sure you have somebody there who makes sure it all works properly, especially if you don't have a moil, if it's a doctor doing it, because you want to make sure that it is still being done for religious reasons, not just a medical reason. Because as we just mentioned, some people had a circumcision for medical or even cosmetic purposes because they liked the way it looked. And that leads us, to what happens to people who already had a circumcision, but then they decide to become Jewish, right? So you can't cut off if it's already missing. Well, first of all, if it is still there, then they do need to have a circumcision, right? We do need to do a proper circumcision. But if they are medically circumcised, but they have not had a Brit Milah, we do need to do something to symbolize the Brit. And what we do is there is a small little It's almost like when you've ever had like blood taken from your finger, where it's just a little,
a little bit blow.
yeah, just a little, boop, just a drop. That's taken from that area, and that's called hatafat dam brit. Now, it's never happened to me, I have to be honest, but I have been there with many men, and they say they can barely feel a thing. It's like almost nothing. I've also been with a rabbi who was trained in this, and he did it to himself just so he could see what it was like. And he said, yes, it's like you barely feel anything, and you recover just like that. If you are an adult and you get circumcised completely, it does take longer to recover. It's not just, you're going to be out, rock climbing the next day. It's you do need to take it easy for your body to heal. And as we talked about just before we began, if you need this arranged, you can talk to the rabbi to help you make that arrangement.
I actually have a question
Yes.
concerning converts. So is the Hatafat Dam Brit, is that just for non-Jews converting to Judaism, or does it also count for like Jews maybe from like a Reconstructionist background going into Orthodox?
Okay, so yes and no.
Okay.
The favorite answer. So there are some people who, when they were children, they were circumcised with no real intention, right? The family might have been Jewish, so the parents were Jewish, but they weren't living a Jewish life. They weren't thinking about Judaism. They just circumcised them because everybody was being circumcised. Like I said, when I was young, most boys were just being circumcised. Someone in that situation, when they become an adult, would probably want to do the Hatafat Dam Brit in order to say, I am circumcised because of Judaism, not just as a random act that my parents happened to do. On the other hand, if someone was circumcised, but you don't know for sure 100%, was it done exactly according to halakha? Was it exactly the right day? Was it exactly the right? In those cases, unless there's any obvious reason to doubt it, like, you still have a foreskin, then usually that's perfectly fine. Now, in many Orthodox communities, they will assume that anyone not from an Orthodox family didn't do it right. Even if it was done right, of course, they'll just assume it wasn't right, and they'll require Hatafat Dam Brit a second time on top of what might have already been a perfectly fine and appropriate circumcision. So it's not surprising. And I have talked with men who have gone through this because of their connection to Orthodoxy and the demand that Orthodoxy put for their own sake, but not because of halakha.
Question, do they give them like a certificate or something so they don't
Always.
have to go through that again?
You always get paperwork. So yes, you get a little document that says, this was the date that the baby was circumcised, and this was the moil, and this was the rabbi. And it's a nice thing to have. It's also good to keep hold of, because I have found that some families, sometimes if they don't come to synagogue often, they kind of forget what was the Hebrew name, and those certificates are a great reminder of what was the Hebrew name. So it's good to keep hold of those so that you don't lose that information.
And you can use the copies?
Oh yeah, you can.
Okay.
Yeah, you can photocopy it 100 times.
So with that said, then to the Orthodox, if the paper exists,
They don't care.
okay.
If you say, oh yes, my conservative rabbi was there and the moil was there, they'll say, oh, conservative rabbi, nah, it's not good enough. So it's unfortunate. The same thing, by the way, can also be true for weddings. That many Orthodox will say that if you were married by a non-Orthodox rabbi, that your wedding isn't valid. So that's a whole nother issue. We are going to talk about weddings briefly before the end of tonight. We'll talk about weddings in more detail in another class. But I wanted to give you the full range of life cycles. Simchat Bat, the celebration of a girl. All right, this is the joy that we have when we have a daughter born, which I know firsthand. There is no direct mitzvah or time frame for welcoming girls. The Torah doesn't say, and you will ... for a girl, like it did for circumcision. But of course, we feel joy when a daughter is born. And so different communities have come up with different customs of how to celebrate this. Some will invite the family to the Torah for an aliyah, and then they can publicly say, this is what her name will be. Some will have feasts just like for a Brit Milah in their home or in the sanctuary or in the synagogue, where they can can then celebrate, and they'll sing songs and they'll do blessings that are very similar to a Brit Milah, because all of these will include giving the name and the saying the blessings, and of course, a lot of happiness with food, because it's not a real joyous occasion unless you have a seudah, unless you have this feast to celebrate the mitzvah. We good? Okay. Pidyon haben. This is one that a lot of people don't know about, but 30 days after the birth of a firstborn son, there is a ceremony to redeem him. This is based off a passage from the book of Exodus. This is in keeping with the idea that the firstborn of all creatures belong to God, and also a reminder that the firstborn were spared during the Exodus. Just remember, the plague of the firstborn killed all the firstborn, but not ours. So our firstborn have kind of a special debt. And the Pidyon Haben basically is paying back God for the right of that firstborn. When it comes to animals and first crops, those all get dedicated to God, all get donated. Our first children, we get to keep. But we do this ceremony to say we're keeping it because we are redeeming them back from being taken away. Not that God would ever take our children, but it's the feeling of dedication and holding on to. Now, there are many, many, many details about Pidyon Haben, because the birth of a firstborn son is a very technical term. So, for example, if it is the firstborn of the father, but not the firstborn of the mother, maybe she was married before, then you would not do this. If there was already a daughter born, and then the boy is born, you would not do this. If it was through a cesarean, you would not do this. Right? So there are a lot of reasons why we might not do the Pidyon Haben, why it wouldn't be a requirement, and therefore we wouldn't do it. So always talk to your rabbi if you have a firstborn son to make sure whether we need to or don't need to take care of this mitzvah. But you've got 30 days to figure it out. Make sense? Okay. Coming of age. At 13, the age of mitzvot, taken from Pirkei Avot, from the Mishnah. A child is not considered legally responsible for his or her actions until they reach the age of 13, right? That means if they break the law, whether they are, they kill someone else's cow, or whether they eat bacon, whichever kind of law they're breaking from the whole range of Jewish law, they are not punished like adults, right? Not by the human court and not by God. So God does not say, that 5-year-old, he just picked up a crayon and drew on Shabbat. Bad 5-year-old. No, right? It's a 5-year-old. The 5-year-old has done something wrong, but the 5-year-old does not receive the punishment, not from us and not from God, the way that a 20-year-old would receive the punishment for deliberately violating one of the commandments. And that's because under 13, most people aren't really able to make a decision. That's clear enough that to say they are deliberately breaking one of the commandments. And so at 13, that changes. At 13, they do become responsible. Now, does every 13-year-old live up to their responsibility? No. Does every 30-year-old live up to their responsibility? No. Right? So this is the moment when we begin to say you're responsible whether you like it or not. Now, most people want to celebrate that. And so we try to make sure we celebrate it. Now, at puberty, like I said, we now hold them responsible for human courts, but the heavenly court begins at 20. That may be a little surprising. Why is the human court stricter than God? Right? God gives you till 20 to figure out how to be a good human being, but we make you have to decide at 13? Well, it's because by 13, you are now in a place where you can create life of your own, and you are in a place where you can destroy life, and we have to live with you, right? You can mess up the community pretty bad as a teenager if you're not trying to live a good life. So the community is responsible for holding the people accountable from 13 up in order to make sure that society will function. You can imagine if we had in America, if we said, oh, a 15-year-old, if they run someone over, that's no problem. It would get out of hand very, very quickly. And so 13 is the human court, but God knows that it takes longer for a person to really mature, and that's why God waits until 20 before really keeping track of their mistakes. Now, as different children develop at different ages, this age is set 13 as the common age for all boys and 12 for all girls. Technically, it should be puberty for each and every person individually, but without checking the physical development on each person, it's easier to just set 12 for girls, 13 for boys, because that is the average for most of them of when they begin the process of developing puberty. Make sense?
Who determined the age of 20 to be the heavenly court age?
Because that's the age that the Torah talks about for people having responsibilities for going off to war. So that's when God is expecting people to be responsible for their behavior completely.
So it is saying the Torah.
In the Torah, well,
age 20?
it does and it doesn't. In the Torah, it says we count people only from the age of 20, right? We don't count a 15-year-old for the census of the population. We only count them from 20 and up. So that's where they get the number 20. But as a community, we need them to be a little bit more careful before 20.
At 18, they can run over a pedestrian.
Yeah, well, yes. All right, so how do we do this celebration? Well, to celebrate the coming of the age, our youngsters demonstrate their knowledge and enthusiasm by leading the community services, by reading from the Torah and Haftarah, and performing other mitzvot. You technically become a bar or bat mitzvah whether you have a ceremony or not. Right? Becoming a bar or bat mitzvah means you have lived long enough that you are now legal, that you are now responsible for your own actions, and your parents are not. But it's nice to actually celebrate doing this. It'd be the equivalent in America of having your 18th birthday, of celebrating when you register to vote, right? I now have this privilege, this responsibility, and so I'm going to throw a party as I fill out the paperwork to say, yes, I am ready to take on my responsibilities as a citizen of the United States. That's basically what a bar mitzvah ceremony is the child saying, look, I can lead the service, I can read, I can do other mitzvot. I am showing you that I am happy and ready to take on these Jewish responsibilities. And then, of course, we eat. So in our congregation, you'll know that our boys and girls do this ceremony at 13 to make sure they receive equal instruction time. This is a little bit of a embarrassment in all the world, but when many children have their bar or bat mitzvah, they will often stop coming to school, right? It's like they feel like they've graduated, and so they'll stop. So if we allowed girls to have their bat mitzvah at 12, many of them would stop a year early from what we give from our school. And that would mean that all of our girls would have 1 year less information than all of the boys. And we do not want our girls to be dumber than our boys. We want to make sure they have the same standard of education. So we make them wait a little bit longer than they would have to according to Jewish law, but this makes sure they get much more Jewish learning. So that's our rule. Weddings. By the way, you may notice that through our different life cycle events, all of them are about our responsibilities. Let me contrast it with American life cycle events. When you turn 16, what's the big life cycle event?
Driver's license.
Driver's license. I am now free to drive, right? I now have the right to drive. When you turn 18, what's the big thing? Right? I can vote now. I'm legal. I can move out on my own, right? It's all about, again, I have the right to be on my own. I have the right to be independent. I have the right to vote. I am free of my parents' authority.
And they say, I'm an adult.
And they say they're an adult. When I turn 21, what is the big deal?
Drinking.
I now have the right to drink as much as I want and be stupid, right? So, what's that?
The best thing to do.
The best thing to do, exactly. I have the right to be stupid. You have to dare to be stupid, as Weird Al says. So all of the American life cycle events are structured around getting new rights, new freedoms, new privileges. In Judaism, all of the life cycle events are structured around getting new responsibilities and obligations. So yes, the Brit Milah is technically about the child, but it's really more about the parents saying, I am now responsible for this little thing, and I have an obligation to help them become Jewish, to help them learn. Same thing with Pidyon Haben. I have a responsibility to redeem them, to make sure they are following the ways of our people. I have a bar mitzvah. Now this is the first kind of adult activity a person does for themselves. I have responsibilities. Yay! I'm going to do work to celebrate. It's kind of weird for the modern world, but it makes a lot of sense for ancient communities, not just Jewish, but most cultures, where children would celebrate gaining maturity because now they could have more responsibility, not just more freedom, but more duty to the community. And nothing says that like our weddings, right? A wedding is very much about bringing two people together and celebrating the responsibility they're going to have for each other, and that they are giving up freedoms in order to have something better than just being by themselves. And the wedding does a great job of that. Like I said, we're going to go through this a little quick, because not a little quick, it's just the surface, because we're going to do a lot more detail in a later class. We know from Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, it is not good for the human to be alone. Now, normally people will translate this as the man to be alone, but the word is technically ha-adam. And Adam, although that's used as the name for the male human, is also just the name that we use for human, right? The word for a man is ish. So Adam is really saying that it's not good for humans to be alone, right? A human of any type needs another human really to be with, right? You have to have the right one. You don't just grab anyone, and too many people are too eager to grab someone. But it is important to find a good person that is a good fit, that makes that makes your life better than you would be by just yourself. Judaism believes that marriage is a beautiful way to bring two souls together, to build a home, to build a life that would be impossible without the other half. Of course, if you are single, there is nothing wrong for that. There's no shame in that, but there is a beautiful opportunity when you bring two souls together that simply can't be done when you are single. Again, that doesn't mean that it's wrong to be single, and there are many reasons why people will remain single their whole life. But there are opportunities that open up when you come together. I'm sorry, this is really distracting today. Let me turn that off. Okay. The husband and wife are meant to love and respect each other. The ceremony is really very, very simple. In fact, if you want to do a Jewish ceremony in fast forward, you can do it in about 5-10 minutes. It does not take very much time. I add a lot more to give people, their full experience. I want them to really enjoy the opportunity, but it technically is very short. The ceremony has two parts technically. The betrothal, called erusin, and the blessing, nisuin. Together, we often will refer to the ceremony as kiddushin, meaning sanctification, that we are celebrating the holiness that exists between these two people. Now, the betrothal and nisuin used to be separated by a lot of time. It used to be 2,000 years ago, even 700 years ago, where you would have your betrothal, and then you would wait a year before you finished the whole process. So it was kind of like you got engaged and then you got married. But nowadays we do them together. I'll explain why in the other class. So how do we do it? Well, we welcome the bride and groom into the chuppah. I'll explain that in a second. And then a blessing is recited over a cup of wine, which symbolizes our gladness. Blessed are you, Lord our God, Master of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments, very normal for any mitzvah type activity, and commanded us regarding forbidden unions, and who forbade betrothed women to us, and permitted to us those married to us by chuppah and kiddushin. Praised are you, Lord, who sanctifies his people Israel with chuppah and kiddushin, with the two central elements of the wedding. So we're saying, you know what? It's actually better that we have a marriage, that we don't just run around with anybody we feel like, and then tomorrow go to a new person, and tomorrow go to a new person, and tomorrow go to a new person. There are some people we shouldn't be with, you know. If they're married to someone else, or if they're like, you know, my sister, then I shouldn't be with that person as a husband or wife. And then there are other people that I can be with once I have actually married them and brought them as part of my life. And that's a pretty good thing. After that, the groom offers a ring to the bride, like this, and will recite the following blessing, or not blessing, but declaration. Behold, you are consecrated to me by this ring, according to the laws of Moses and Israel. And if she accepts the ring, then they are now half married. Right? This is the part that would have been the beginning of the ceremony, and then you would wait a year to finish it off. But at this point, they are now linked. They can't be with anyone else. They are only supposed to be with each other, but not yet, because we haven't finished the ceremony. Now, in the modern world, most women will also choose to give a ring to the groom as well. Now, this is important that it's a separate choice, right? Because weddings and marriages are not about if I give you this, you give me that. It is about each giving and then building something together. And so it has to be done just right, but the giving of a ring from the bride to the groom is now very common in most non-Orthodox weddings. And even in some Orthodox weddings, it's not unusual. Questions on that part? Okay. Then we read the ketubah before the second part of the ceremony begins. I'll explain what the ketubah was in just a second. The second part is called nisuin, and the main thing that happens here is what we call the sheva brachot, the 7 blessings. You are blessed, Lord our God, sovereign of the world, who created the fruit of the vine. Boom, number 1. You are blessed, Lord our God, sovereign of the world, who created everything for his glory. You are blessed, Lord our God, sovereign of the world, creator of man, or human, Adam, again. And number 4, you are blessed, Lord our God, the sovereign of the world, who created man in his image, in the pattern of his own likeness, and provided for the perpetuation of his kind. You are blessed, Lord, the creator of man, or human. So there's a progress here. Of course, we're starting off with the wine just because it's the sweetness and joy. But you can see God made everything. God made us. God made us so that we are able to be with other people to make more of us. I mean, God did not make us like a worm, where I can make a new worm just by cutting off a piece and growing a new worm. I need another person in order for us to have children. And that is a blessing. That's not a weakness of humans. That's actually something that's very good for us. We continue, number 5, let the barren city be jubilantly happy and joyful at her joyous reunion with her children. That is a reference to Jerusalem. You are blessed, Lord, who makes Zion rejoice with her children. We imagine that Israel and Zion are happy to see a new Jewish family being made. 6, let the loving couple be very happy, just as you made your creation happy in the Garden of Eden so long ago. You are blessed, Lord, who makes the bridegroom and bride happy. So each of them should be happy, just like Adam and Chava were happy in the garden so long ago. And then number 7, the long one. You are blessed, Lord our God, the sovereign of the world, who created joy and celebration, bridegroom and bride, rejoicing, jubilation, pleasure and delight, love and brotherhood, peace and friendship. Think about that for a second. Right? God didn't just make us animals. God made us able to have these feelings, able to have the joy of recognizing love, the joy of recognizing friendship, the joy of recognizing being linked with other human beings. We don't just come together like 2 dogs in a field. That is amazing, and our ancestors understood that when they wrote this blessing. Note also that all of these feelings are ones that the bride and groom should have together. Right? It's not only love, and it's not just economic, right? But it is delight and pleasure and peace and friendship and brotherhood, meaning together like members of a family, not just as like strangers who happen to be roommates. Right? This is all part of what a good marriage should have. May there soon be heard, Lord our God, in the cities of Judea and the streets of Jerusalem, the sound of joy and the sound of celebration, the voice of bridegroom and the voice of a bride, the happy shouting of bridegrooms from their weddings and of young men from their feasts of song. This is an image not just of happiness, but of ultimate happiness that is often used as a metaphor for redemption overall. You are blessed, Lord, who makes the bridegroom and the bride rejoice together. So you will notice here they are each happy, here they are happy together, which is to say that together they're able to find a happiness that they couldn't have if they were apart. So I mentioned ketubah. So the ketubah is a special document that is kind of like a contract. And in Torah, you have to understand that a woman does not inherit from her husband. Right? If he drops dead, she gets nothing from him. Right? Why? Because the land was the main thing that was of value. And the land belonged to the tribe. And the woman didn't necessarily come from that tribe. So if he dies, she doesn't get the tribal land. That land has to go to another member of the tribe. And since tribes are passed father, son, father, son, father, son, it has to go to either his children, if he has children, or to his brother, or to his uncle, or to some other relative if there's only some other relative, but it doesn't go to her. But that creates a problem, right? Because if he dies or he divorces her, she gets 0 according to the Torah. The Torah does not say he has to give her anything. And the rabbi said, okay, that doesn't seem like a good idea, because that means that women are incredibly vulnerable. They could become poor like that. And we know that this is a real problem because when you read through the prophets and when you read through the Psalms, who is always being used as a symbol of the weakest person in a community? The widow. Right? Why? Because a widow her husband could die and she would end up with nothing. And so she would need God to help her. She would need the community to help her. And the rabbi said, you know what, maybe we can actually fix this. So that when you get married, the husband will make a contract, will make a promise that if he dies or divorces her, he has to pay her, or his estate has to pay her, a large amount of money so that she will have something to live on. So this becomes like a prenuptial agreement so that she is protected no matter what. And that way, when she gets married, she can feel safe that when she's getting married, she's not risking everything by going off to live with this guy who could die in a month and leave her stranded with nothing. It's very sensible. So I mentioned the chuppah before. When I say that we get married with a chuppah, the chuppah is a canopy that stretches over the space where the bride and groom are getting married. It can be made out of lots of different things. But the important thing is that it symbolizes the halakha, the legal space that we are conducting the ceremony in, and also the home that the couple is going to build. It is also a reminder. Hello, but the 7 o'clock class is in the chapel. It's also a reminder of the bridal room that the couple would go to after the ceremony in the old days. In the old days, you got married, you had the party, and then you went to the room while everyone else stayed at the party. And everyone knew what you did in the room, right? That was your honeymoon suite. Nowadays, we don't do that quite so publicly. But this is still a reminder that the husband and wife are going to share this special place together for the rest of their life. It is still important, however, for the husband and wife to have a little time together. It's called yichud, right after the ceremony. So as soon as the ceremony is done and they walk out from the chuppah, I always will hide them somewhere so that they can spend 10, 15 minutes alone and not be bugged by everyone, and just say, look, right now, your husband and wife, enjoy that moment uniquely and just together. And then go greet all of your guests. They can wait. Questions? Comments? Like I said, we'll go into weddings in a lot more detail. There's one other life cycle event that I didn't cover here because it takes a lot more explanation, and that's death. Because that's the last life cycle. And death comes in 2 big parts. There is, what do we do for the person who is dead? And what do we do for those who are grieving, for those that are sad? So we will cover that in a whole class by itself. Okay, thank you very much. And